on page 103. 103. طيب, so we're going to go to 103. Now, in page 103, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, يُوشَكُ أَن تُدَاعَ عَلَيْكُمُ الْأُمَمِ من كل أفق كما تداعى الأكلة على قصعتها. There's going to come a time in which nations from all over will be rushing to attack you, rushing to eat you, to consume you, to overpower you. The way that a hungry group of lions or animals prey on a vulnerable animal that is left. So قلنا يا رسول الله أو من قلة. We said, Ya Rasulullah, is this because we're few in number? Is it because we're a minority? يومئذ, on that day. He says, لا أنتم يومئذ كثير. You're going to be many. ولكنكم غثاء كغثاء السيل. But rather, you're going to be like the bubbles, the foam on the water. تنزع المهابة من قلوب عدوكم. We take away your ability to induce this awe from the enemy's hearts. So meaning, before this, they used to look at you, or people used to look at you with an eye of respect, an eye of admiration, right? But Allah takes that eye of admiration away from the gaze, the onlooker. The person who sees you does not see you as worthy of the awe. Rather, you're dehumanized, or you're demonized. Dehumanized or demonized. So تنزع المهابة من قلوب عدوكم ويجعل في قلوبكم الوهن. And Allah will put this sense of weakness, this sense of humiliation in your hearts. So two things happen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes away from the hearts of others the respect towards you, and Allah takes away your own ability to have this self-respect. And you become very weak in the way that you perceive yourself, and you become weak in the way that others perceive you. Both. So you have a very bad self-image, and there's an image that others have towards you that is also very weak. So they said, Ya Rasulullah, how do we get to this? He said, because of the wahan, this wahan that Allah has put inside you, this weakness that Allah has put in your hearts. This is waman wahan. What caused this wahan? What is this wahan? Where did it come from? He said, Hubbul haya wa karahatil maut. Loving life and being afraid of death. Being afraid of death. Loving life because you become so attached to the dunya, so you have this affinity towards the dunya, you love the dunya, you love everything in the dunya, you want more, to a point where it begins to consume you and distract you, like Allah says, أَلْهَاكُمُ التَّكَاثُرُ. Your desire for more kept distracting you, حَتَّى زُرْتُمُ الْمَقَابِرَ, until you visited the graves. And the second thing is كَرَاهَةِ الْمَوْتِ, and you begin to fear death. You begin to fear death. Now that doesn't mean we are people that love death to the point where we're like, oh, we're death, like war hungry and blood hungry and bloodthirsty. That's not the point. The point is that we're not scared of what's to come, because we've invested years and energy and time to building a better future with Allah. So we're looking forward to the day that we meet Allah. We're not scared. We don't have anxiety about what is to come. We have security about what is to come. So because we're in a state of content and calm when you're close with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're not worried about what's to come, because you've built for it, you prepared for it, you've studied it, it's become a part of who you are. You live for it every single day. You live for it every single day. So what is he saying here? What is he saying here? Why is he putting this hadith in talking about the impact of sin? Why is he talking about the impact of sin in this, using this hadith as an example? Why? Who can tell me? It's obvious, but just want to hear from you. The impact of sin. Sin does what? Yes. It takes away from Iman. It reduces your closeness to Allah. And what does that effectively do to your dunya? Yes. It makes you unprepared after death. Good. Specifically, why this hadith? The Prophet ﷺ mentions two things happen to you. Yeah. It affects how you see yourself and how others see you. That's what Ibn al-Qayyim is saying. Sin affects your self-image and affects the image of others, like perceptions that people have towards you. That's what he's saying here. So imagine when you come across somebody who is determined, who is fighting their demons each and every single day, and they're not letting those demons win. right? They're coming prepared, they're strong, they're always on the top game. That's somebody that you respect. You have this admiration towards that person. Like, subhanAllah, they're not giving up, they're not letting their darkness take over, or any darkness take over. But if you have somebody who's given up, they just don't care. They're like, whatever, YOLO, you only live once, just whatever. Embrace the desire. Embrace the whispers. Embrace the lust. Embrace it all. Just live. Live and let live. That person, even if we celebrate their, yeah, great, be yourself, whatnot, deep inside, when you have proper grounding and foundation, you will look at that person with an eye of what? Disrespect. An eye that this person is weak. They don't have discipline, resilience, or tenacity. And so what the Prophet ﷺ is saying here is that sin reduces discipline, sin reduces tenacity, sin reduces resilience, sin ruins your image of yourself, sin impacts the way that others perceive you, even if it's subconscious. Even if it's subconscious. So when people look at Muslims, they're seeing Muslims as demonized, as all of this stuff. It's a result of our own sins. It's a result of our own collective distance and absence from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what this hadith does. Now, he goes on to say, listen to this carefully. In the second hadith, he says, وَقَالَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم لما عرج بي مررت بقوم لهم أظفار من نحاس يخمشون وجوههم وصدورهم فقلت من هؤلاء يا جبرائيل قال هؤلاء الذين يأكلون لحوم الناس ويقعون في أعراضهم. Now he mentions, Ibn al-Qayyim moves from the impact in this world to the impact in the hereafter. And he says, and I heard in the Musnad Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, that the Prophet ﷺ says when he went to the Mi'raj, when he went in the journey of ascension, he says, I saw people with very long nails, and these nails seem to be made out of nickel, like out of iron almost, right? Nuhas could be iron or could be nickel, and they were constantly yakhmishuna, they were scratching their faces and their chests. I said, oh Jibreel, who are these people? He said, they are the people that used to eat. They used to eat the flesh of people in this world. And they used to constantly talk bad about them. So backbiting. Mentioning about your brother what you don't want mentioned. Whether it's true or not true. If it's not true, it becomes buhtan. It becomes a form of slander. Right? Buhtan, slander. And if it's done and it's true, and they don't want it to be said about them, then it becomes backbiting. So why is Ibn al-Qayyim saying this hadith here? What does this hadith essentially do? What does it do? The second hadith does what? Remember, the broad category here is the impact of sin. So sin takes away your self-image or ruins your self-image. It takes away the hayba, the awe, the respect that people have towards you. It puts distance between you and Allah. And sin also does something else. What does it do? It makes you what? It makes you almost negative and sensitized to the sins of others. So you're most likely to interpret others as doing sin because of your own sins. Sorry? It's a form of projection. So you end up in this cycle of backbiting. So he says the people who backbite the most, that's what he's saying here. Right? Essentially, he's going to make this point again. The people who backbite the most are those who are actually most in deep sin. Because had they not been in deep sin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have given them the honor of being able to protect their tongues and would have been able to give them the shielding required to maintain that sense of, that sense of honor. But it's a form of dishonor that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to the individual when He lets this individual fall in the eyes of others by consistently mentioning negativity and mentioning others in negativity. Because if you keep talking about others in my presence, what am I going to assume? That you're also most likely going to talk about me in my absence. But we're very special. That's true. But we're not going to always be special. Tomorrow I'm going to do something that upsets you. If you can't control your tongue about Jessica and Abdullah and Sarah and, then most likely it's going to. So that's what it does. Now that's in this dunya, but what about in the akhirah? Because he's mentioned the hadith also to remind us that there are consequences for actions in the akhirah. These people are scratching their faces and scratching their chest. This is a punishment in the akhirah. And it's a very specific punishment. It's a punishment for the person who did that, scratching the face of others. Because imagine you have this image of others that you try, or image, you have this face. And what you're doing is you're scratching that face. You're defacing it. That's what backbiting does. When you backbite somebody, you're defacing their skin. You're scratching their face, right? You're ruining their image. And what that does is it gets you to be punished in the exact same way physically. You become now ruining your image in the akhirah. That's the punishment. And that's again another lesson that we learn. Al-jaza'u min jinsi al-amal. That the consequence of the punishment is going to be similar to the nature of the crime. Right. Now he continues. And this is the third hadith that he mentions. Now remember, the main heading that we're talking about, the impact of sin. So all of these hadith, he mentions them for a reason. And I want you to pay attention to the psychology of submitting or summoning these ahadith, what they do to us, and what image they invoke and evoke. يَخْرُجُ فِي آخِرِ الزَّمَانِ. At the end of time, there will rise a group of people. يَخْتَلُونَ الدُّنْيَا بِالدِّينِ. They begin to compromise. They begin to compromise their deen for dunya. So يَخْتَلُونَ, what does يَخْتَلُونَ mean? They begin to sell. They begin to give up their deen for dunya, ready to exchange their deen for dunya. وَيَلْبِسُونَ لِلنَّاسِ مُسُوكَ الضَّأَنْ مِنَ اللِّينِ. And they will wear the most celebrated of skins in front of people. أَلْسِنَتُهُمْ أَحْلَى مِنَ السُّكَّرِ. Their tongues are better than sugar, sweeter than sugar. وَقُلُوبُهُمْ قُلُوبُ الذِّئَابِ. But their hearts are the hearts of wolves. يَقُولُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ أَبِي يَغْتَرُونَ. Is it me that you think you're going to deceive? وَعَلَيَّ يَجْتَرِئُونَ. And they have the audacity to act this way in my presence. فَبِي حَلَفْتُ. So I take an oath upon my being, my essence. لَأَبْعَثَنَّ عَلَى أُولَٰئِكَ مِنْهُمْ فِتْنَةً تَدَعُ الْحَلِيمَ فِيهِمْ حَيْرَانًا. I promise and I take it upon me that I will send a form of trial and tribulation over them that will leave the wisest amongst them in a state of absolute confusion. Absolute confusion. So so first of all, this hadith, in the words that are used, there's a question about the authenticity. In the matan, the chain. But the words that are used all come from other ahadith which are merged together. So this most likely, again, as I mentioned this before, is a saying of the companion in which he's rephrasing and paraphrasing the Prophet ﷺ's actual words to make these words more palatable to an audience that he's speaking to. But the hadith in meaning is actually true, and it's verified and corroborated by many other ahadith which echo the same meaning. And what the Prophet ﷺ is saying here is when people begin to sell their deen for dunya, and they begin to put on this flowery display, it begins to be all performative and very little substance, very little core. Allah says, in that time, He says to them, are you really trying to fool Allah? Like, you have the audacity to try to fool Allah. You mispresent and misrepresent yourself in front of Allah. You're putting on a show, forgetting that Allah is your audience at the end of the day. That, okay, you want to do that? No problem. What I'll do is I'll allow the work that you're doing, all of it, to blow up in your face, and you become then the subject of your own object that you've created. You become the person that now receives that test from Allah, and He says that this kind of test or fitna will be one that leaves the wisest amongst them in absolute confusion. Hayrana. You know, is this like, should I do this, should I not? In this state of hesitation and confusion. So whenever you see the ummah enlarged in a state of confusion and hesitation, and we don't have the ability to really make decisions, there's a lot of indecision, a lot of that kind of attitude, right? That in itself is a punishment that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, nuancing is important, guys. Nuancing is important, and having these detailed conversation is important. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that as you gain more depth in your knowledge, it doesn't compromise the principles that are grounding. What happens when we attend a university like this, the liberal arts, the secular institution, if you're a student of anthropology or a student of history or a student of whatever those, any of those kind of, liberal arts, humanities programs, and I'm one of them, by the way, right? I'm taking anthropology, I'm taking sociology at the PhD level. But what are the words? What are the trigger words? What are we always hearing? Problematize, rupture, intervention, intervening the literature, problematizing our understanding, complicating our understanding. So problematizing, complicating, those are good words. Sure, so sometimes we need a bit of complexity. Yeah, let's complicate it. Let's understand the bigger picture. Let's that. Let's take something which is seems to be like, oh, let's take this ball and let's open it up and understand it. Let's take this idea and open it up and understand it. That's what tafsir does, by the way. Tafsir literally means to expand, to take something and you open it up. But if by opening it up, you lose sight of what the actual thing is, and you redefine what the actual thing is, and it takes away from your sense of reality and grounding, that's when it becomes what? That's when it becomes problematic. That's when it becomes problematic. And a lot of the way that we get sensitized or trained in our very specific programs will actually impact our truths and our understanding of truth and our positions and positionalities in many ways. So as you're being trained in these programs, think about how this actually impacts your sense of reality, your sense of truth. Think about the habitus. Who was it that came up with the idea of habitus? You guys remember? Bourdieu, right? Right? So the idea of habitus is that we are all inhabiting specific frames, specific institutions, specific ways of thinking that are impacting us in subconscious ways. In subconscious ways. The way that a class is structured, the way that an institution is structured, the way all of these things are part of the habitus, and what they're doing is they're engaging in exercises of discipline, mentally, physically, that are constantly shifting the way that we think and shifting the way or changing the way that we see the world. And what Ibn al-Qayyim here is going to allude to later on, is going to ask us to think about the positions that we occupy each and every single day and how those things are going to change who we are and what we are. And what every position opens up as an opportunity and what every position closes as an opportunity. Let me give you an example. I'll give you a personal example. I was having a conversation with some of the students who were considering what careers they're going to pursue. And one of them said, I want to become an imam. And the rest of us looked at him like, bro, don't do it. Why would you do this to yourself? Haram alaik. Right? And by the way, like again, as somebody who's been serving in the community as like an imam and this and that, for now close to, subhanAllah, I started in 2000 and like 7, 8, and what? Now it's almost like, can't even, many years, almost 14, 15 years, right? So we're all looking at him saying, don't do it. Don't do it. Get your Islamic education, no problem. Get training, but just don't become an imam. Do something else. Be an engineer, be a doctor. It's not worth it. And we can talk about it for many reasons, right? Mainly financial, social, all of these things. As you age, you become a bit more sensitized to these things. You have a family, you become less utopic and you become more critical. And he said something very powerful, which I also feel on a day-to-day basis. He says, it's not about the social and the economic benefits. There's one thing that I want is the accountability of knowing that I have to lead salah each and every single day, because then there's no chance that I'm going to miss it. There's no chance that I'm going to miss it, and there's no chance that I'm going to not pray on time or prioritize it because it becomes my job. Now, that's, you see, that's part of your habitus. Whatever you occupy each and every single day, whatever you choose as your position, even literally, in the literal sense, it will impact the decisions that you can make and the decisions that you can't make consciously and unconsciously in many ways. How are you here? Who canceled? Sheikh Abdul Aziz canceled? Khair, khair. By the way, guys, we had some issues at ISNA, and they had requested that I go and cover. But I was like, you know what? I don't want to disappoint you guys by covering ISNA. So I sent Afshar to cover there. And Afshar shows up. I'm like, uh-oh, that's... But I'm glad, yeah. It's all good. Right? So keep that in mind. Now, let's continue. The next hadith he's going to mention. He's going to mention. قال علي يأتي على الناس زمان لا يبقى من الإسلام إلا اسمه. There is going to come a time in which the only thing that will be left of Islam is its name. ولا من القرآن إلا رسمه. And from the Quran, only the script, the calligraphy. مساجدهم يومئذ عامرة وهي خراب من الهدى. Their masajid will be full, yet in complete ruins because of their distance from guidance. علماؤهم شر من تحت أديم السماء. Their scholars are evil. منهم خرجت الفتنة وفيهم تعود. From them, the scholars, begins the fitna, and upon them, the scholars, the fitna shall return. From them, the fitna goes, and upon them, the fitna returns. So, again, it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us through these ahadith, and this is a hadith, or it's a khabar, rather, that is narrated or attributed to Ali ibn Abi Talib, not the Prophet sallallahu attributed to Ali ibn Abi Talib. And what it shows is that there's going to come a time in which basically Islam is no more. And this is a result of people's lack of accountability. Lack of accountability. Lack of holding the scholarship accountable. Lack of holding leadership accountable. Lack of training. Lack of preparation. Well, what was I just saying? Nobody wants to become an imam because we've made it socially undesirable to become an imam. We've made it socially unprofitable to become an imam. Right? So again, I've been working in the field for 15 years, roughly 14 years, right? I started quite young with my father. And you'd think in any career, if you've been there for 15 years, your salary would get to a certain point. I can tell you that I make more money. I'm speaking to you guys as brothers and sisters. I make more money from my business incomes on the side than I make from an imam. Like 2-3 times more. And if anybody was doing it for the money, nobody would do it. It's just not possible. Nobody will be able to stay to survive. Now we need to think about what that does long term, right? What that does long term. And imagine the amount of pressure that it places on our leadership. Imagine what, subhanAllah, yani, what that does in the long term. Because I'm reading these hadith, how do you get to a point of where your scholarship is just ruined? Where your intellectual heritage is ruined? It happens in many ways, yes, self-corruption and whatnot. But what happens when the colonial enterprise came in? And we don't want to blame everything on colonialism, but it's reality. What the colonial institutions did is they began to basically make rigid Islamic schools and education, kind of like cast them to the side, make the admission criteria quite low, and then place a lot of emphasis on the secular forms of knowledge, especially math, especially handasa, engineering, especially tib. And that's why if you come from any part of the world that has been affected by colonization, you ask like an Egyptian family, even till now, we're talking about post-colonial world, but not really. You ask them, what do you want your son to be? What do you want your daughter to be? Doctor, engineer, or dead. Right? That's where it comes from. Whereas in the past, if you look at the time of Salah ad-Din, for example, you look at the time of Salah ad-Din, who were the highest paid members of society? Islamic judges, most highest paid position. Imams, second most highest paid position. Right? And after all the services related, like social workers, psychotherapists, in that sense, right? These were the highest paid positions. Doctors were paid quite well too, but they were the middle class. Now, we need to think about how that in itself is affecting and bringing to reality these things that the Prophet ﷺ warned about. Because now imagine I have my baby Bilal at home. When I look at my baby Bilal every day, I'm like, okay, I'm training him every day to get to a point in his life. Right? I know Bilal, right? One of you guys, yeah, Bilal. Not talking about you, I'm talking about my baby Bilal. Right? So as you look at your son or you look at your daughter and you're trying to groom them for what is to come and train them for what is to come, I'm looking at my son, I'm saying, okay, how much of the imam job and the imam knowledge, this cumulative culture do I want to pass on to my son actively? And how to prevent that from becoming a limitation, but rather a strength? Because take a lot of the people that I know, mashallah, that began this work for the sake of Allah, sincerely, what happens is there's this absolute burnout. Because what happens even in my position when I have to take on, 3 or 4 side hustles just to be able to meet, day-to-day requirements, what that does, it takes away from the actual work. And then you're left exhausted. So you can't even do the work that you love and that you're passionate about, because you just can't. So we need to think about all of these things socially that we've created, mashallah, and things in place. And now what happens is a dialectic. Then you have communities that are like, okay, we'll pay our imam, $150,000, $200,000, no problem. And then we'll worship our imam. And then it becomes problematic on the other side as well, that dialectic again. So we need to become aware of how this is playing out. And what he's saying here, subhanAllah, the reason why he mentions this hadith is actually in the last part. مِنْهُمْ خَرَجَتْ فِتْنَةٌ وَفِيهِمْ تَعُودٌ. These imams or leaders are the ones that created this chaos, fitna in the community, and it's upon them that it shall return. So the one that creates a fitna will eventually be consumed by it. The one that slips up will be the one that's eventually going to be gobbled up by what they created with their own hands. طيب? And then he goes on to mention another hadith, right? إِذَا ظَهَرَ الزِّنَا وَالرِّبَى فِي قَرْيَةٍ أَذِنَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ بِهَلَاكِهَا. When you see zina, infidelity, and riba is, unlawful financial transactions, including interest. It's making money off of money. How many of you guys know of the concept of financialization? Financialization. Good. Financialization. So back then we used to sell and buy a product. You go to the store, here's batikh, here's money, beautiful transaction. So halal. But now even our subhanallah, day-to-day transactions have become so financialized that there's riba in almost every single transaction. Riba in almost every single transaction. Let me give you an example. Right now, there are many places where you can't use cash. You have to use your credit card. Your credit card, as a credit card issuing company, it has to take a risk. Has to take a risk because it's giving you money that it might not receive. And in giving that person the money on your behalf to the seller, what it does, it also takes a risk, because the seller might give you something that you don't end up being happy with. So because of that risk, there is an additional what? Charge. That additional charge is added into the transaction, and that becomes basically what? Basically making money off of money. Like that transaction itself might actually be problematic from a Sharia point of view because of the risk associated with it and how it's constructed. Like, not only that, let me give you an example. Imagine I as a bank. Right? Look at the way riba has become prevalent in our day-to-day interactions. Not just mortgages, not just your credit card interest after the 28 or 24-day grace period. Those are obvious forms of riba. Talk about the hidden forms of riba. So right now, your credit card company, every time I use that credit card, like I buy something for $10, right? Now, what happens is I pay that $10 back, but I'm charged an administration fee for using the card. No problem, that's fine. But what this allows the company to do, the credit card company to do, let's say they have $500. They can give out that $500 over and 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 over again, almost unlimited times. The same $500. I can give it to you, give it to so many more people than the actual money that is there. Knowing that you're going to pay back, 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 because it's now digital, right? So that's another way of actually creating money off of money. Banks, I have $1,000, but I can give 10,000 people $10,000 because I have that $10,000, and I'm loaning it to multiple people at the same time. Where's the money? It's out there, subhanAllah. That's another form of financialization, amongst many other examples, many other concrete examples. Think about the crash of the market, or the crash of the market in 2008, and how you were selling, you're lumping all of these mortgages together and then selling those, right? What are they called, by the way, when you lump these mortgages together? You create what? Mortgage sandwiches, what are they called? Oh, university students? Yeah. Okay, you get the concept. Khalas, no problem, no problem. We'll move on, right? So, and Nabi Sallam said, when zina and riba become manifest in a society, Allah orders its slow destruction. Allah gives permission for the decay of that society to begin. So all of these hadiths, what they show is that there are going to be consequences for your actions individually, community, socially, collectively. Another example, إذا أظهر الناس العلم وضيعوا العمل وتحابوا بالألسن وتباغضوا بالقلوب وتقاطعوا بالأرحام لعنهم الله عز وجل عند ذلك فأصمهم وأعمى أبصارهم. If people begin to manifest knowledge but ruin action, they focus on appearing to be knowledgeable. Oh, I'm going to tweet this and I'm going to tweet that and this post, but your actions are actually empty. وَتَحَابُوا بِالْأَلْسِنِ, and they start to show love using their tongues, but they show or they conceal hatred in their hearts. وَتَقَاطَعُوا بِالْأَرْحَامِ, and they begin to disconnect from their loved ones. Last time you checked on your mom, you checked on your dad, you spoke to your uncle, you spoke to your aunt. Last time they actually talked to the family unit is gone. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we get to that level, Allah orders for the barakah to be taken away from that society and that society to be cursed. And فَأَصَمَّهُمْ وَأَعْمَى أَبْصَارَهُمْ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes away their ability to see, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes them mute. They cannot, or makes them deaf. They cannot hear the truth. They cannot see the truth. Allah takes it away from you. This idea of if you don't use it, you lose it. If you don't use it, you lose it. Allah gave you the blessings of knowledge. You appear to be knowledgeable, but you're not actually using it to make society better. Allah takes away from you the ability to know to begin with. The next hadith, Nabi Sallallahu said, Ya ma'shar al-muhajirin, all people of the migrants, the people of Mecca who went to Medina. خمس خصال وأعوذ بالله أن تدركوهن. 5 attributes, and I ask Allah to protect you from reaching a point where you see them. ما ظهرت الفاحشة في قوم حتى أعلنوا بها إلا ابتلوا بالطواعين والأوجاع التي لم تكن في أسلافهم الذين مضوا. فاحشة, any sexual infidelity or sexual immorality or sexual absurdity that becomes manifest and public. It becomes practiced in public. It becomes publicly acceptable. Because does it happen? Yes, it happens. Humans are humans. Humans are humans. It happens, but it happens privately. When does it become a problem? When it becomes public. Why? Why does it become a problem when it's public? When it's public, it means 2 things. It means that not enough social accountability is there to deter people, and the people who have the capacity to actually articulate an argument against this have become so few or so weak that that pinpoints to corruption. Not enough people know that it's wrong, or not enough people know it's wrong and have the capacity to articulate and do something about it. So that's the problem here. That's the problem. The Prophet ﷺ said, this happens, what happens? Allah will allow them to experience, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow them to experience they're going to be tested with tawa'in, plagues, all of these, you can say epidemics or pandemics, وَالْأَوْجَاعَ الَّتِي لَمْ تَكُنْ فِي أَسْلَافِهِمْ, all kinds of pain, psychological and physical, that the previous generations did not experience. وَلَا نَقَصَ قَوْمٌ الْمِكْيَالِ, and not a group begins to diminish in the way that they sell and buy, cheat the system, cheat the scale. إِلَّا ابْتُلُوا بِالسِّنِينَ وَشِدَّةِ الْمُؤْنَةِ وَجُورُ السُّلْطَانِ. They're going to be tested with oppression from their leadership. Allah is going to test them with basically living in a time where they're persecuted. شِدَّةِ الْمُؤْنَةِ, a lot of struggles financially. Sineen, poverty. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test them with all of these difficulties. وَمَا مَنَعَ قَوْمٌ زَكَاةَ أَمْوَالِهِمْ إِلَّا مُنِعُوا الْقَطْرَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. And no group collectively will begin to stop giving zakah except that Allah will prevent rain from falling. So there'll be droughts. فَلَوْلَا الْبَهَائِمْ لَمْ يُمْطَرُوا. Had it not been for the beasts, Had it not been for the animals living there, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not send rain at all. وَلَا خَفَرَ قَوْمٌ الْعَهْدَ إِلَّا سَلَّطَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ عَدُوِّهِمْ مِنْ غَيْرِهِمْ. And a group that begins to be dishonest in their covenants, in their promises, Allah will send enemies from above or enemies from beyond them, not in group, out group, that will make their life much, much more severe. فَأَخَذُوا بَعْض مَا فِي أَيْدِيهِمْ. And they will begin to take away what and some of their possessions. All of these examples, Ibn al-Qayyim highlights that our sins will have consequence and impact. Will have consequence and impact. So, rain that doesn't fall, droughts, famine, poverty, earthquakes, plagues, pandemics, all of these things have a spiritual component as well, in that Allah unleashes them. Yes, there are natural things, you can predict them. You can predict a thunderstorm when it's happening. You can predict this. Some of it may not be within our predictive capacity, but there's a spiritual component to them. And the question is it always going to be the result of bad? The Prophet ﷺ already answered that question. He said, when he was asked about the plague, he said it's rahmah for the believers and a punishment for the non-believers. Because the person who happens to be good living in that time and dies because of it, dies, they go back to Allah and they're rewarded. And the person who happens to live in it and die who is not close to Allah will be punished because now they have received their fate. And the others that are experiencing minor, like not death, but things less than that, you know, oh, my business is not functioning properly because I run an Airbnb and now I can't because, you know, we're in a pandemic and a global lockdown. That in itself is a consequence as well. That's a form of loss of income that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala unleashes to wake you up. You're somewhere in between. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still gives you a chance. So the same test can manifest differently towards different people. It can take somebody's life and that can be good for them because now they're in a much better place. It can take somebody's life and that can be much more horrible because now they're in a much more dangerous place. And it can become an inconvenience or a test to bring somebody closer to Allah, or even a test to bring somebody further down a state of wrong. Let me give you an example. This is actually a conversation that I had, subhanAllah, a few days ago, where one brother had a very, very difficult bunch of, you know, it's that time of the year where you have a lot of exams and things are coming up. And he's an embryology student in medicine, and it was just a bad time. So everybody's sitting there like talking about how difficult the exams are and how life sucks, you know, that kind of conversation, exam talk. And then one of the guys, he's like, you know, come on, man, it's you know, in this college, they don't even check, they don't even bother. You could literally bring in your own cheat sheets. You could bring it's so easy to cheat. You're you know, Apple Watch, this watch, that watch, you know, earpieces, mashallah, creativity to the max. They don't know I'm an Imam, by the way. So the guy who was saying that didn't know, right? Because things change. Everybody puts on their good side, right? When you're around certain people, because of the that social element, right? Cognitive dissonance in some ways. But in any case, the response from this guy was beautiful. It's really, really touching. He said, "How can I expect Allah to be honest with me if I'm not honest with Him?" How can I expect Allah to be honest with me if I'm not honest with Him? He's like, what do you mean? He's like, if I'm asking Allah for clarity each and every single day, if I'm asking Allah to not delude me, to not allow me to be deceived, because when you say, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, Allah guide me to the straight path and along the straight path, you're asking for guidance. Guidance is clarity. Clarity is honesty. You want to see the world for what it is. You don't want to be deceived. You don't want the world to deceive you, to manipulate you, to lie to you. You want to see the world for what it is. That's what clarity is. That's what hidayah is. Ya Allah, guide me. Allow me to move away from all of these biases and perspectives and isms, and allow me to really rise above all of it and to have a clear foundation and a clear insight. So that's the dua that I'm making. And then when I'm alone or when life pushes me, I'm gonna manipulate the system and cheat. Because Allah is my number one audience. So I'm deceiving myself in front of Allah. And what that does is it puts me in a position where I'm saying, Ya Allah, I don't care enough about myself. My self-worth, my integrity, right? I am okay with deception. So what do you expect is going to happen to you? You're opening up your world, your life for deception. And that reminds me of the hadith. Yani, whoever is honest with Allah, Allah is going to be honest with them. Whoever is clear with Allah, Allah is going to be clear with them. And that's why you'll find that the people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the most guidance to are going to be the people who are most trustworthy, most honest. Think about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as-sadiq al-amin, the most honest, the most trustworthy. Allah chose him for a reason. Integrity is key. You do not expect Allah to be honest with you and to give you the reality of the world if you're not real with yourself, if you're not honest with yourself, right? So the same thing here. The idea here is that every sin that we do, automatically is a signal to Allah. Is a signal to Allah that I don't care enough about myself and I'm not worthy of guidance. So you can't make a sin, especially if you know, if you're aware of it, and then expect that not to impact your relationship with Allah. Which is why when you start not having the attitude, like imagine the opposite of that is everything that happens in your life, you're so careful about, you're so cautious about. What that does is it signals to Allah, I care about my life and I care about guidance. And that's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins to actually put the guidance in your life, the clarity in your life. And you begin to feel this heat of Iman, this sweetness of Iman. If nothing comes to your mind, if you don't feel shivers or like goosebumps or heat in your heart and your body, like physical, right? When I say the word, you know, heatness of Iman, sweetness of Iman, like what are you talking about? That's a problem, because it means you've never been there. And it's a problem if you say, oh yeah, I remember 5 years ago when I was in the righteous mode, but righteous mode got deactivated, right? That's even a bigger problem, because then you taste it and you let it go. But ask anybody who's been on this path, like a path of discipline, a path of honesty. When you begin to be so meticulous with yourself, there's muraqaba, muhasaba, there's self-accountability, right? You have a pen in your hand that does not belong to you. You're like, oh my God, la hawla la quwwata illa billah. This pen has Hilton on it. I probably got it from, Hilton, or I got it from this, or I got it, jazakallah khair, or I got it from somebody who got it from Hilton, and you return it, and that becomes, you're to that level. I mean, some people are like, oh, Hilton, you think they're gonna worry about a pen that they lost? Come on, it's an infrastructure, it's a capitalistic society, it's a, that justification. When you begin to justify your sin, that in itself now opens up the door for so much. But when you shut that door for fitna by being honest, by having the integrity, by having that accountability, self-accountability, that is when you open up your heart for absolute guidance and absolute emancipation. And that is when shaitan begins to shy away from you, and the angels begin to love being in your company. The angels love being in your company. They love being around you. So they don't want somebody they take it upon themselves to protect you, to honor you, right? And that's where you have this haiba, this almost intimidating, like someone becomes intimidating in the righteousness, in a good way. When you're in their presence, you're like, I know I gotta be on my best game. Intimidating in that sense. But they also have rahmah, where they become very open to, they're with you. There's no judgment. There's no disrespect. There's a lot of taghaful. They'll ignore, they'll let things be, but you know that they know. Right? So it might be that sigh, it might be that, it might be that, They haven't said anything because they don't want to hurt you, but they know. And being in these people's presence after some time, it itself forces you to be in a better state. So think about the impact. All of these are impacts of the sin. And then after having said all of that, before we do that, there's one more hadith that I want to mention. When they talked to Aisha radiallahu anha, And he said to her, Ya al-Mu'mineen haddithina an al-zalzala. Tell us, O mother of the believers, Aisha, tell us about the zalzala, the earthquakes and the earth shaking. She said, radiallahu anha, إذا استباحوا الزنا, when people begin to make zina acceptable. وشربوا الخمر, and they begin to drink alcohol. In another narration, and to call it by other than its name. Zina and call it other than its name. He says there's a lot of renaming in the modern world, right? In the modern society, to make things less aggressive. She's not a prostitute, she's a sex worker. She's not She's not doing it because she's financially limited. It's a form of empowerment. It's not alcohol, it's a spirit drink. Right? It is not zina, it's a cohabitating relationship. All of these renaming that we engage in, right? And there are many examples. So she says they begin to make zina okay. Make zina okay. They begin to drink alcohol and call it by other than its name. وَضَرَبُوا بِالْمَعَازِفِ. And when they begin to ضَرَبُوا بِالْمَعَازِفِ, they begin to really play music and instruments, and it becomes widespread. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will غَارَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ فِي سَمَائِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has this protective jealousy over his creation, and he says to the earth, تَزَلْزَلِ بِهِمْ فَإِن تَابُوا وَنَزَعُوا وَإِلَّا هَدَمَهَا عَلَيْهِمْ. Allah says to the earth, begin to shake, give them a wake-up call. If they begin to repent and turn back, Allah will return things to normal structure. But if they begin to, or they continue to live and do what they used to do in the past, هَدَمَهَا عَلَيْهِمْ. Allah will cause the earth to swallow them up. So they said to her, Ya al-Mu'mineen, أَعَذَابًا لَهُمْ. When the earth begins to shake this way, is it a punishment? She said, لَا بَلْ مَوْعِظَةً وَرَحْمَةً لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. It begins to be a reminder and a mercy to the believers, because like, oh man, the Prophet said this, I need to get my life together. وَنَكَالًا وَعَذَابًا وَسَخَطًا عَلَى الْكَافِرِينَ. And it becomes a deterrent also, and a punishment, and a form of humiliation for those who are far away from Allah, for those who are engaging in gratitude, and for those who are engaging in kufr. And there are many, many more examples of this. Tamam? Now we're going to skip a few pages quickly, inshallah, to go to page 116. Now this is amazing. Ibn Abi Dunya, he mentions the hadith of Ammar ibn Yasir, and he says the Prophet ﷺ says, إن الله عز وجل إذا أراد بالعباد نقمة أمات الأطفال وأعقم أرحام النساء فتنزل النقمة وليس فيهم محروم. When Allah wills for a society to be punished collectively and severely, Allah begins to take away the children. And Allah will allow that society to reach a point where they don't have as many children anymore, where they're not interested in children anymore. So the ratio of minors begins to diminish, begins to get much, much lower. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might cause for women to be what? To have infertility problems. Because as long as there are weak people and children in society, Allah continues to bless that society because of the weak and the minority, or the minors that exist. But when you see this exodus, when you see a lot of good people leaving, a lot of innocent people leaving, the population of gentleness is disappearing, right? When you see a society, subhanAllah, I'll give you an example. This sheikh was talking about one of the earthquakes that took place in a community, without mentioning the country. He says, subhanAllah, before like 5 years ago, a lot of the imams, a lot of the religious people, they felt like this community did not represent them anymore. So they began to leave, large in numbers. And after that, a lot of the innocent, the people who are like masakeen also, they couldn't live there anymore. It just became unbearable. So they left, until only those who are actually like most capable, most powerful stayed. And when that was the case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent that punishment. What Ibn al-Qayyim is giving you here, an example, is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually holds people accountable in this dunya before he holds them accountable in the akhirah, and the examples in which this can happen. Tamam? There are many more examples here of a hadith. I'm gonna again they iterate the same kind of concept, and they talk about the same kind of meaning. Tamam. One of them that's nice to think about is there'll come a time in which the people of Iman will hide among the people of non-belief in the way that a hypocrite hides their hypocrisy. Sometimes you're going to live in a time where you actually have to hide your faith in the way that a hypocrite has to hide their hypocrisy. Subhanallah. And how true is that of the time that we're living in today and the world that we're living in today? And it may only get more and more so over time. Now, we're going to get to page now 132. And he talks about now specifically وَلِلْمَعَاصِ مِنَ الْآثَارِ الْقَبِيحَةِ الْمَذْمُومَةِ وَالْمُضِرَّةِ بِالْقَلْبِ وَالْبَدَنِ وَالدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ مَا لَا يَعْلَمُهُ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. There are many, many, many punishments and impacts of your sin, harmful impacts on your heart and your body and your world, your worldly affairs, and your hereafter, in ways that only Allah knows. But I'll give you an example. Number one, فَمِنْهَا حِرْمَانُ الْعِلْمِ. Lack of knowledge. Allah takes away your knowledge. Allah takes away your knowledge. And wallahi, this is so true. Imam al-Shafi'i said this: شكوت إلى وقيع سوى حفظ فأمرني بترك المعاصي وأخبرني بأن العلم نور ونور الله لا يهدى لعاصي. I complained to Waqi', my teacher, about my lack of ability to memorize as much as I used to. And he told me to be careful with the sins because the knowledge of Allah is like a light, and the light of Allah is not going to be given to a sinner. You'll see people, subhanAllah, when they're really close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their recall is amazing. Their ability to focus is incredible. They hear something and they remember it. I'm sure you, especially, yani, I'll give you an example. I knew guys that you asked them to memorize anatomy, terminology, they could not care less. There's no chance. They won't be bothered. Now they hear a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ once and they will never forget it. They never have to write it down. Wallahi, I know of them and I've seen many of these people. And what happens is they go through a spiritual crisis, a test. Could be a test of, a test of wealth, a test of like a horrible relationship, a spouse that destroys them, right? Makes their life miserable. A child that destroys them, makes their life miserable. They go through a test, and that test affects their relationship with Allah. And you see the impact. The person who used to remember the hadith, remember the ayah just like that, now they're like, what's that ayah again? What's the hadith again? What's the? Because what? Because subhanallah, your mind will be stripped of that clarity and stripped of that focus, stripped of the ability to remember if it's far away from Allah. Now that same person can go through a test of a bad marriage, test of a bad child, but they persist and they don't let that affect their relationship with Allah. So it's not the stress. Do you see what I'm saying? In the modern clinical experience, what are we going to say? Oh, it's stress. But the same person who's struggling to remember, anatomy and whatnot, their ability to recall a hadith and Quran and this and that has only become more increased. Their ability to memorize the Quran has become stronger after going through the divorce. How do you explain that clinically? It's not, so stress is not just blind. It's not a umbrella category that includes everything. Sometimes stress can actually push a person, like stress in the physical sense, right? Pressure. Not stress in the clinical sense, right? Stress in the pressure sense can push a person to actually becoming closer to Allah, and that can actually manifest clinically in better recall, better memory, better this, better that. So think about that, subhanAllah, right? And he mentions, Imam al-Qayyim, he says, when Shafi'i visited Malik, remember the story of Imam Shafi'i and Malik? Shafi'i grew up with his mother's help in Palestine, in the area, and he collected all the knowledge there. Then he went to Yemen, collected all the knowledge there. Then he went to Mecca, collected all the knowledge there, and became an expert at a quite young age. At 14, 15, his teachers would tell him, you could be a judge now. You're done. He said, no, I want to go and I want to make sure I learn the schools of thought or the perspective of Imam Malik. So Imam Malik was not a joke. Imam Malik was very serious as a teacher. He said, there's no way I'm going to take a student on, especially if the student comes highly recommended. Because who's going to give a recommendation? Usually the elite. So why am I going to take this kid who's been pampered and privileged by some elite? Some Amir writes me a reference letter. Here, take this. So he actually took all the reference letters. He's like, this is from the Amir of Ethiopia, Al-Habasha. That's right. Tell the Amir of Ethiopia to go drink it. Oh, this is a reference letter from the Amir of Mecca. Could not care less. This is a reference letter from, he would literally, begin some of his halaqat by saying, today I received a reference letter from him. And he would rip it. Because Imam Malik was not, like, again, he's a Medinan, he's Medina of the Prophet ﷺ. So he had this honor, he had this like integrity. There's no chance I'm going to take these kids on. All of these privileged kids, right, born in privilege, and they don't know what knowledge actually is. They're not ready to hustle for it. When Imam Shafi'i came, Imam Shafi'i knew that. So he came with a recommendation, right? But he said, the recommendation is only there to let you know that I've done my part. And it comes from the Imams, not the leadership, not the Umara. But I know it means nothing to you. All I'm asking is for you to give me a chance. So Imam Malik tells him, tell me, how is your journey with knowledge? He said, my journey with knowledge is such that I wish my entire body was an ear. I wish my entire body was an ear so that I could listen to knowledge. And just like my ear is entertained and mesmerized and in the sense of awe and pleasure when he hears knowledge, I want my whole body to experience that same thing. And why did he choose the ear, not the eye? Because the eye can be deceived in ways that the ear cannot. Incredible. He's like, I'm not there for the performance. I close my eyes and I listen. I'm attentive, not through the gestures and the performance. I'm actually listening. So Imam Malik was mesmerized. It's like, this is a 14-year-old talking this way. You ask a university student, why are you studying? Oh, I don't know. What do you want to do? Oh, no. Even the ability to enunciate is gone. Allah yahdina ya Rabb, ameen. In any case, right? So then he told him, tell me a little bit more about the Quran. He said, the Quran is a gift that Allah gives to those who put in the effort. Have you put in the effort? To the best of my capacity. But I don't attribute any success to myself. I attribute it to Allah. Okay, read from the Quran. He tests him 5 times, doesn't make a single mistake. Every time it gets harder. What about the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ? As for the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whatever has come to me that I've checked and verified to be true, I've committed to memory. And whatever has come to me and I've checked and verified to not be true, I've committed to memory so that when I hear it, I can call it out. But I don't attribute any success to myself. It's only through the grace of Allah. Imam Malik at this time is measured, like amazed. So he asked him, what else? He's like, I've read this book and I've read that book and I've read this book. And not to play to your ego, but I've read your work. And what do you know about my work? Well, I've tried my best to commit it to memory. You've memorized my work as well? Yes. He tests him in Muwatta. Muwatta is pretty much one of the first hadith collections, and he makes no mistake. So Imam Malik is excited to take him on as a student. And that's what he said to him now. He said, إِنِّي أَرَى اللَّهَ قَدْ أَلْقَى عَلَى قَلْبِكَ نُورًا فَلَا تُطْفِئُهُ بِظُلْمَةِ الْمَعْصِيَةِ. I see that Allah has placed upon your heart a light. Don't lose it through sin. Don't lose it through sin. Guys, there are many people that you see and recognize at a young age to have talent. And you look at them and you think to yourself, I know that you have a bright future ahead of you. The only way that you can lose it is if you screw yourself up. You have to commit a sin somewhere down the line to lose that clarity, because Allah has given it to you and it's so clear. The path is so clear ahead. It's so clear. The kid might not see it, or the teenager might not see it. Even you as a university student, like a lot of you still have your whole life ahead of you guys. Not just 4-year-olds, 14-year-olds, but even you. But what happens is, subhanAllah, your sins get in the way. Think about how many times, a more practical example, you see, for example, soccer players or basketball players, they have so much talent at a young age. And everybody's like, wow, mashallah, tabarakallah, this person is definitely on an amazing trajectory. And then all of a sudden, they just disappear. Like, what happened to them? What went on? What went wrong? And what are the usual pitfalls? How do they usually lose? Marriage scandal, before even getting married. Yeah, usually, what happens? Drugs, big one. I don't want to, but already in my mind, because I used to be like an active soccer player for a long time, played varsity and whatnot. And I remember during those days, there were a lot of soccer names like, oh my God, can't wait to see what this guy does. Can't wait to see what this guy does. Can't wait. It's going to be an amazing career trajectory. And then all of a sudden, they just disappeared. Drugs, power gets them distracted, where they lose themselves in the fame, and then they end up going to nightclubs, women, pleasure, all of these scandals happen. They lose their sense of honor and dignity. And when that person loses their sense of honor and dignity, they lose everything. So the same thing with sin. Your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can have an amazing trajectory, and then it's lost or it's interrupted by the sins that we take on that weigh us down. Then he says the second thing that can happen, not just knowledge is taken away. Now knowledge, guys, knowledge, what do you mean by saying knowledge is taken away? I remember once visiting a community in the south of Egypt, not too far away from where I live. They live like almost like a Bedouin lifestyle. Very, very, like very few of them go to school. They live like, as they say, they're just living life without any kind of, control. So they see any kind of outside control as coercive. They don't go to school. They don't do this. They don't do that. They have the little structures. They don't ascribe to any power structures, right? They have their own Bedouin structures. And I remember sitting with one of them and having a conversation about the Quran and Sunnah and Hadith and whatnot. And subhanAllah, I told him, tell me what you believe in. And he was mentioning this and 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 this. And we got into like Aqidah, we got into Hadith, we got into this, we got into this. And as he's saying all of this stuff, I'm like, are you sure you've never been to school? There's a level of Iman and faith and understanding of Islam that you have just by existing in a community. You're purified. Even you don't have to go to school to know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, basic things. But there are parts of Islam that you really need to study to know. Like very specific parts. Right? It's the way it is. It's the way it is. It's the way it is. So there's a part of knowledge where Allah gives you this basira, this intuition, where you start doing things and your heart starts liking things and disliking things, and you later find, oh my God, the Prophet actually said this. The Prophet told us not to like this. The Prophet told us not to like that. So you don't struggle with the tradition, but you become almost one-on-one with the tradition. And the Prophet ﷺ actually said this, said, none of you truly believe until your desire begins to be in sync with my desire. So you never heard the Prophet said this, but you're already doing it because it becomes a part of your desire. Right? So for example, let me give you an example. Is one of the things in his community, everybody prays Fajr for the most part and leaves. Is one of the things that I never compromise on is staying in the masjid after Fajr until sunrise, consistently. And I pray 2 or 4 rak'ahs and then I leave. Do you know that the Prophet ﷺ actually said this? Is like, I never heard that. So why did you do it? It's just, he's like, I must have seen it somewhere, but I intuitively love doing it. And there were many of these examples where you begin to be intuitively connected with the Sunnah and you begin to love it. So that's what knowledge is. Allah puts this light in your heart that guides you. Like, why did you decide? SubhanAllah, there are people where their decisions, in hindsight, you look back at your life and you could write a story of like, oh my God, I had this incredible insight. I knew exactly what I was doing. And yes, it's the reason why I did this at this time and bought this at this time and did this at this time. But realistically, they were going based on intuition, istikhara and istishara along the way. And Allah has made them make every ideal decision along the way. And they would never be able to like fully attribute it to themselves. Sometime down the line of success, we like to reinterpret the past, say, oh, I meant it to be this way. Of course, I was actively thinking, I made every decision. That's from shaitan. That's when you begin to lose, right? But a lot of it was actually, subhanAllah, intuitive. He said the second thing that can happen when we begin to delve into sin is hirman al-rizq. In al-abd yuhramu al-rizq bi-dhanbi yusibu. We talked about this, right? That your rizq, your provisions will be taken away from you. We discussed this many times. And then the next one, wahshatun يجدها العاصي في قلبه بينه وبين الله. This is, this is a very sad one. وحشة يجدها العاصي في قلبه بينه وبين الله. How is this translated into English? I'm curious. Can you read the English translation?
Feeling of desolation. Turn this on. A feeling of desolation that the sinner feels in his heart between him and Allah.
Continue reading that paragraph.
Yeah. The kind that does not measure up to or compare to any pleasure. Even if all the pleasure of this life were combined, they would not equate to filling the void made by this feeling of desolation. This is something that only those with life in their hearts can comprehend.
Let me ask you this, guys. Have you ever seen somebody accept Islam genuinely, sincerely? Not those marriage conversions or conversion for the sake of traveling to like whatever, anthropological, ethnographic study, unethical nonsense, right? A sincere conversion where you really see the person there, they have tears in their eyes. Have you ever seen the moment where their face lights up with Iman? You guys know what I'm talking about? Where a person has this awe moment where everything falls in place. Like now it makes sense. Iman has entered the heart. It may not even be a conversion to Islam. It could be someone who was lost for a long time, then they reconnected with Allah. That like moment where it just falls in place. Subhanallah. One of the punishments of sin is the opposite of that. Where you feel there's so much distance between you and Allah that you can't work out that difference and you're constantly running away. So, and it happens so slowly, Like imagine one thing that he says later on in the book, he says, whenever you see two people love each other for the sake of Allah and they begin to fall apart, it's usually a sign that one of them has started to commit some form of sin. So you met somebody in the masjid in Ramadan and your relationship was like so genuine, so special, so powerful. Like there's this automatic love, boom, hearts connected, you're laughing, no takalluf, it's not this fake relationship where, you're eyeing yourselves up, you're constantly judging each other, you're like, asking all of it. None of that. It's just genuine for the sake of Allah, pure love for the sake of Allah. And then all of a sudden it just starts to swindle and dwindle and just break apart. It's usually because of some sin in your life, on either one or the part of the two. And so sin, what it does is it takes away our heart's ability to actually be present in the moment. Our heart's ability to be kind, to be compassionate, to feel and to be felt, to connect and to be connected with. All right, and it's a sad thing because what happens is you do the first sin and you feel so bad, like I can't stand in front of Allah. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to give it up. So that sin causes another sin, another sin, another sin, another sin, another sin. And then you end up being in a position where you don't want yourself to be around any people who remind you that it's a sin. You don't want to be in the masjid. You don't want to be in the halaqat. You don't want to be this. And it's slow dwindling and slow basically decaying away from where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to be. Tamam? And then he says this in the next point. Al-wahsha allati tahsal lahu baynahu bayna an-nas. We're going to finish with this. So read the next al-wahsha allati, and also the desolence that you would feel between you and people. That section, please, and we'll finish with this.
Okay. Bismillah. From them, seclusion from the people, especially the righteous, because he will feel some isolation from them. Every time this feeling strengthens, they grow further apart. He is deprived from benefiting from them and draws even nearer to the party of Satan as much as he distances himself from the party of Allah. This feeling intensifies until it becomes controlling, thus appearing between him and his spouse, his children, his relatives, and even within his own self, to the extent you may even find that he is dejected. Some of the pious predecessors have mentioned, indeed, I disobey Allah, and I notice it affects in the behavior of my writing beast and my wife.
So this is incredible. I disobey Allah and I see the impact right away in my relationship with my family, my wife, my children. this is very powerful because two things happen. We begin to change our behavior because of the sin. So they receive that signal and they basically disconnect, especially young kids. Young kids really know when you're present and when you're not present. When you begin to commit sins, especially the sins of the heart, what happens is you're constantly not really there. You're distracted. You're either looking for the next high, if it's a sin of addiction, or you're attached, or you're constantly worried about what's going on, and it's taken a big part of your heart and presence and focus, and that makes you no longer available, no longer receptive. Your kids, your family pick up on that, so they basically also begin to be distanced. And a part of it is barakah. A part of it is Allah actually takes away the barakah in your life, where you begin to not be able to enjoy the moment. So you're always looking for a distraction. You're not really, it's like somebody who took sugar, and after taking sugar, they have an apple. So they're trying to bite the apple, but they're not really enjoying the apple. Why? Because they've ruined their palate. So when you overstimulate yourself in the haram, in sins, it takes away the ability to actually enjoy what is good for you, what is actually good for you, what is decent for you. And that's why a lot of people, they say, I don't care about the halal, haram aspect of music. Yeah, sure, you can tell me there's an opinion, this is halal, but I'm not going to do it, because what it does is it impacts my ability to connect with the Quran. It impacts my ability to enjoy the Quran. And that's why I'm going to give it up. I'm going to give it up willingly, knowing that I can supplement and get the same impact, if not more, through the Quran. And that the Quran is not just distractive, it's not just empty words, it's the words of Allah. So rather than listening to something which can calm me down, can have an impact, but it doesn't really reward me in any shape or form or bring me close to Allah, why not do that through the Quran? So think about the ways that your sins either create a distraction component or a distraction impact in your mind and your heart, and thus take away your relationship with others, make you no longer connected and being connected with easily. And think about the way they take the barakah away, where they make you no longer really available for others. The Prophet ﷺ was kissing his grandson Hassan Hussein, kissing them publicly, and he's just enjoying his moment. And a monk is like, how dare you do this? This is not a manly thing to do. What did the Prophet say? He said, what can I do if Allah took mercy away from your heart? Allah took that ability to just enjoy love from your heart. What am I? Nothing to say. You be you, man. May Allah guide you. Right? So may Allah protect us from that, Ya Rabb. Ameen. Jazakumullah khair. We'll see you inshallah next week.